University, where we speak about green transition in economy and what to expect. One of the developmental goals of Tallinn Technical University is to be a pioneer in creating an industry which is focused on green transition and digital transition, and we will therefore talk about potential developments in global economy which derives from the European goal to become climate neutral by the year 2050. How can we achieve this goal? How can we do it in a way which is good for economy, for the environment, and which would not damage the well-being of different groups in the society? Green transition is a major present challenge, but it's also an opportunity to provide for a better living environment. Our seminar today is science-based, and we will talk about improving the economy and different aspects thereof, but we will first listen to the industrial and political perspective that Europe has. I am Helen from Tallinn Technical University. I am a prorector of digital transition here at the university, and I now welcome Ms. Maive Rute, who is the Deputy Director at DG GROW at the European Commission and also a member of the Council of this university. Thank you and good afternoon. I'm very glad to be here today and to speak to all of you today and to speak about green transition. And I would first like to start from a statement by our literary classics. We have a story in Estonian where a boy told the girl that we need educated farmers. And I would like to tell you that we really need well-educated engineers who can develop technology, who are innovative. And the fact that I can speak here today in the classroom of Tallinn Technical University is very important for me because I will be speaking about green transition, so I feel good that I am here. And I would like to say to everyone who is either studying here at the Tallinn Technical University or who has already completed their studies or who is just listening to today's seminar, I would like to tell you all that we have chosen the right path because the society needs engineers and all kinds of technology developers in order to achieve the green transition. But what does green transition mean? I would like to start by launching my slide presentation and then by telling you that green transition is a new growth strategy for Europe. It is not actually just an environmental strategy or a climate strategy. It really is a growth strategy which is based on our new economical model. And I would like to show you these four sectors which will be displayed any moment now. And these four sectors, the first one of these is cutting emissions and how this can be done. And it involves a number of measures which I will be describing. Then the second sector is a better use of resource efficiency, their circular use, and also improving resilience of various sectors, which is an important goal, and I will be addressing this in further detail. The third sector says that Europe cannot act alone on the global level, but we must include other countries. And the fourth and final sector is, of course, about involving all EU member states and about helping those who might face energy poverty already now. So the fourth sector is about social fairness and making the transition as just as possible by several measures. But I would like to start from something that I think is already known to everyone. And I would like to say that the essence that the essence of today's talk is cutting the emissions. ETS, the emission trading systems, which has to do with the quotas really. But the idea of the system is that unless we price the emissions, any product that reaches the market that does not really reflect the environmental footprint that the product has. I think you know that ETS has been there in the European Union for a long time, and 44 large companies in Estonia also belong to ETS. These are major technological and production companies. And ETS, which is the emission trading system, is about taxing the biggest polluters, the biggest emission providers. And we have 44 companies which are included in the quota economy. And about 50% of all Estonian CO2 emissions is provided by these 44 companies. The European system, ETS, also covers approximately 50% of all emissions. And it means that the system we have now is insufficient. Why? Because the other half has not been covered. Furthermore, when we think about what is taxed by the emission system, then only CO2, but not the other greenhouse gases such as methane, which I think is even worse for the climate and has a worse environmental footprint. And we also have not been taxing or even addressing the logic which states that we should not only look at these companies which provide the actual carbon footprint, but we should look at the entire life cycle of the products. The life cycle logic is necessary, but it has not been taken into account. And when we now look at the new package, the Fit for 55 package, which comprises various climate measures, and it was launched by the European Commission this summer, then the Fit for 55 package includes various measures. The emission trading system will be expanded in various directions. The first important aspect is increasing the level of ambition, because until now the included or covered sector, the one covered by ETS, was to cut the emissions by 43%, but the new ambition is 61% for those 45 companies that Estonia has. And the ETS will now also include aviation and the maritime sector, which have not been included thus far. And we will also have a separate carbon system for residential buildings and also road transport. This means that the entire system will be expanded in order to include other sectors. Of course, it's only one aspect, but indeed it's very important because it will help shape the rest of the framework. I am now showing you the next slide, I hope, and it's an overview of all the measures that are included in the Fit for 55 package, which have either already been launched or will be launched in the near future. And the slide intends to show you that we are not only speaking about energy transition, but transitioning the entire economy. 55 in the Fit for 55 package means that by the year 2030 we should be able to cut the emissions by at least 55% compared to the year 1990. But by the year 2050 we want to achieve climate neutrality, and in order to do so we have other objectives which were displayed here on this slide, such as more resource efficiency, more savings in the field of efficiency, in the field of resources, and also circular economy. And of course, we must also change our consumer habits and make them more environment friendly. But I would like to give you some more specific examples of those fields. For example, we are looking at aviation, like I said already. The aviation sector will now also be counting the emissions. The same goes for the maritime sector and 2 other fields. But I think it's perhaps important to mention residential buildings and road transport, because I will be speaking about these in more detail. And one of the first trends which we can already witness now is the fact that industrial companies can firstly automatize their processes to use the resources more efficiently. But when we speak about the manufacturing processes, then the most convenient way is to start using more electricity. And these are just some estimates about the projected increase in electricity demands for either heavy industry or such industry that is more energy intensive. And of course, looking at this slide, we can already see that electricity must become more available, and electricity that is available should not be too expensive, because otherwise it cannot be used. And also this electricity should be green and have as little impact on environment and climate as possible. You could also see a small column on hydrogen, which means that the fields where electrification is not enough, but the industry needs stronger resources of electricity, hydrogen should be considered. And hydrogen production really is one of the fields that we are considering right now. And perhaps it's also worth stating that we have a European Renewable Energy Directive, and the renewable objective will now go up to 40% in the near future, and even higher in the more distant future. But now to the problems. We don't have enough investments. The investments are lagging behind already now, because the climate objective really is very important, and we need a lot of investments to build up the infrastructure. But we haven't found these investments. The member states have not put in enough money in developing wind energy or solar energy or other renewable energies. And on this slide we have explained how much investments we require and how much is not there. If we sum up the investments of all member states in their national energy and climate plans, we can still see that it's not enough. It's true that the national energy and climate plans include more investments and higher investments, but it's not enough. It does not reach the goals that were agreed upon in Paris. In order to keep the 1.5 degrees, which is the Paris objective of the climate change, we must invest more than the member states are now doing. And of course, I'd like to tell Estonia at this point that anything that can be done to deploy renewable energy as fast as possible should be done. For example, permits could perhaps be issued a lot faster. And also I'd like to say to those who think of giving finances to the projects, I think you should include those who work at the Tallinn Technical University, because they can give you some input on the payback periods and other data. And of course, I'd like to say what the European Commission wants to see when we look at the production capacity in Europe. My next slide is about is about solar energy and the fact that the use of solar energy and solar panels is increasing very sharply. But when we look at where these panels are manufactured, then we can see that more and more panels are installed every year in rooftops on solar parks. But at the same time, we can see that 80% of all solar panels are produced in China. So we should think whether we could manufacture them here in Europe, whether we could have more technology, which is important to manufacture renewable energy in Europe. It's not only solar panels, it's also the storage technology, it's also the wind turbines and generators, even though we have more of those, because this technology is actually competitive in Europe. But we should look for more opportunities in the field of solar panels and various smart grids and smart grid solutions. More of those could be made in Europe. And this slide includes a very important message. If availability of solar energy is increasing rapidly, then we could hope that we would also have more possibilities in Europe, which are already there in Australia. For example, in South Australia is the colder part of Australia, given its geographical location. In South Australia, there are approximately 3 million households which use solar energy and which also have the storage capacity. And it means that they have new virtual powerhouses because they have storage capacity and they have batteries which can offset certain shortages in the grids, and it gives them energy security. And the more technology we have, the cheaper it will be, and the cheaper, of course, the energy produced by such technology. And I would like to say, I don't know if it's true or not, we will see in the future, but people who are aware of solar energy developments sometimes say that we could expect the electron economy to go the same way as the bit economy has already gone, meaning that prices could be lowered 4 times every 10 years. So the same was repeated now by the speaker in English. It would be interesting to see whether that actually happens. But if it does, then we can see that renewable technology and renewable energy would indeed be much cheaper, which would be good for implementing the green transition. And this is also very important for those sectors of manufacturing which are very energy intensive, like producing fertilizers, for example. More than 70% of the fertilizer price is the price of energy used to make it. So it would be important to obtain cheap renewable energies. And maybe we could also change our mindset. And again, this example comes from Australia. I would like to ask people sitting behind me and also those listening to me, but you cannot really answer. What is the percentage of our energy consumption that should be covered by renewable energy, such as solar energy? What percentage should that be? Just give me a number, any estimate. Given that we need 100% of energy altogether, what percentage should be covered by the renewable energy? I get the first answer, 15%, but I will not take any more responses because the correct answer is very much different. In Australia, the mindset is also different. People in Australia think that if they need energy, a total of 100%, then they want to have solar panels which would give them 400%. They want to produce 400% of their actual consumption, and they will use the surplus to produce hydrogen, for example. And the idea behind this is that if you don't have enough renewable energy at all times, for example, you don't have sun or you don't have wind, but you have 400%, then you have enough base load to cover your needs. And when the price of renewable energy will fall as sharply as it's expected, and then it will be easier to cover the energy needs. But this was a speculation. Now back to Europe, and we will go to the field of transport, because transport is also a high emitter of greenhouse gases. And when we think about transport, of course, again, we think about electrification. Speaking about electrification, not all member states are on the same page to start with. Yes, we will see the map of Europe now, showing us that the member states are actually rather different. For example, if we look at the entire Europe, not just the European Union, if we look at Norway, for example, then you can see that it's dark green. Dark green means that already now many Norwegians buy electrical cars, and those cars have lower emissions. Also, the Netherlands are doing really well because they are working on their infrastructure for electric cars, and they have more loading points, and therefore it's also easier to use electric cars in the Netherlands. They also have all kinds of subsidies and support systems. But in Estonia, we belong among those 5 European countries which prefer large vehicles with large engines, which have a higher impact on climate and environment. But we also have problems with the loading infrastructure. It's not so easy to charge an electric car. And one of the measures in the Fit for 55 package, which has been approved and will be launched, is establishing the infrastructure for electric cars, but also for hydrogen cars to a lesser extent, mainly trucks. At least 30 million electric cars should be present on the European roads by the year 2030. Maybe this number will be even higher. And when I say this, people normally will say but electric cars are not good enough because they don't really run well, and it takes a long time to charge an electric car. And I always give 2 examples. The first one is about Mercedes. Mercedes has developed a fantastic car which can go 770 kilometers after being charged once. And it will be possible to buy a Mercedes electric car. It is already possible to buy one from this autumn. And it takes 15 minutes to charge the car so that it would go for 300 kilometers. But of course, it is reflected in the price of the Mercedes car. I don't know how much it costs, but of course, it is not cheap. And the second thing which would be of interest is the so-called mini car, which has been very successful in China. A factory in Shanghai, together with General Motors, developed Wuling Mini. And Wuling Mini is a car which really has been a bestseller on the Chinese market. But why is it interesting for us? Because Lithuania, which is just south from Estonia, now wants to sell this car in Europe. They will change it somewhat because it has to comply with the European standards and requirements. There are some construction issues which have to be followed. And in China, this electrical car costs approximately 5,000 euros, and it can go for 150 kilometers after being charged once. I don't know what the Lithuanian version will cost, but it's still quite interesting to think, because 5,000 euros is quite affordable for many people. And when you think of 150 kilometers, it's actually a lot of kilometers if you only drive in the city. But we will we will wait and see what happens. And the other car manufacturers, such as Volkswagen, are already working on their own versions of electric car and on improving the existing models. And this brings me to the next issue, and this is construction and buildings. And I think that the issue of construction and buildings is important to everyone who works at this university, but also to anyone who lives anywhere, be it an apartment or a house. One major resource of emissions is the fact that our buildings are not insulated very well because the construction materials were not very good, and sometimes they are just not very good buildings. And also we have to not only heat our buildings but also cool the buildings, especially in South Europe, in the Southern Europe. Many buildings do not comply with the requirements and do not comply with the expectations of people. And you can see from the slide that approximately 75% of all residential buildings are not energy efficient enough and they should be renovated. And when we think about renovation, it's also part of the Fit for 55 package, because the renovation level, it should at least double or triple, because we need to catch up with our climate objectives. And one of the very important, it's one of the very important topics also for Estonia, because we need to think about what materials are used in renovating the buildings, who are the builders who can carry out the work. And again, I have a request for Tallinn Technical University. You should address this issue, because you can think about developing new materials, digitalizing some of the construction work, and of course all kind of heating pumps, ventilation solutions should be developed and marketed, and I think we will talk more in the debate today. And I would now like to speak about other measures in Fit for 55 package. Like I said, Europe cannot work alone on its path to climate neutrality. We have to work together with other countries. Everyone has read about Glasgow. Of course, we can be a little bit worried because not all agreements were achieved. Not everything was agreed upon, but all countries that were present, they confirmed their commitment to achieving the climate objectives. And on this slide, you can see a new mechanism from the Fit for 55 package, which should help us achieve a more just way of life. It's the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, which is meant for those 5 sectors where the environmental footprint is especially large. And without CBAM, we could have a lot of products at artificially lowered prices coming to us from third countries. And these 5 sectors are cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers and electricity. And the border adjustment mechanism should be launched in 2023. They will be deployed gradually, and by the year 2030 we have to think about what happens next. When CBAM has been fully deployed, it will probably be expanded to other sectors. And we should think about the larger global impact of CBAM. And to do this, we need to think about those who import their products to us today. CBAM, the new mechanism, requires that when importing new products, the importer has to pay the pollution tax at the border. And I'd like to point out that the largest importer of cement is Turkey. The largest importer of fertilizers is Russia. Iron and steel, the largest importers are China, Russia and Turkey. The largest importer of aluminium, Russia, but also Norway. And the largest importers of electricity are Russia and Ukraine. So looking at the current geopolitical tensions, and the international scene right now, then we must think about climate issues when thinking about the international problems. sometimes people ask, how can we know that the other states and countries will follow suit? That's why I talked about Glasgow. It really illustrates that it's not only the EU who thinks of climate, but other countries do the same. And then I wanted to talk more about issues which really are important for Estonia. Of course, green transition and energy transition already are very complicated subjects, but there are other things of which we have maybe thought less. Electrification of road transport, establishing infrastructure, yes, these are very important challenges, but there are also other challenges of which we have thought less. And we have not thought so much about the other sectors of economy, where the greenhouse gases also need to be cut. And it's about transport, waste, agriculture, industrial processes, residential buildings and so on, but also transport and forestry. And these are fields where the government must find new opportunities.
Now I would like to move on to the next topic, which is not about abatement of emissions, but about circular economy and resource use. On this slide, you can see an overview of the critical raw materials and input that we need for the technology that forms the basis of our future green, digitalized, sustainable, secure economy. Unfortunately, the list is quite long, and if we look at what are high risk already today on the red line, or lower risk on the green line, for all of those, the EU is largely dependent on third countries. And not only on third countries in plural, but very often on one third country, which makes us vulnerable and what needs to be taken into account when we plan for the future. An example maybe? Regarding the electrification of vehicles, we have followed debates about what is needed for the batteries, lithium, for example, and approximately the lithium demand for EU automotive industry is 18 times more than what we use today by 2030. So we need to face the facts and try to see where we can get this lithium from. But on the other hand, this gives opportunities for research centers and universities such as TalTech to contribute to developing battery technologies and find solutions to replace the metals that are difficult to source. Lithium is not maybe that rare, but there are more rare metals involved. If we look at OECD, they have said that the need for metals will grow with the green transition 150%, whereas now it's 8 billion tons. Then in the future, by 2050, 2060, we will reach about 20 billion tons. And when it comes to metals, the EU, unfortunately, is very much dependent. We import 75 to 100% of these metals, most of the metals that we need for the future economy and industry. Because we are shifting to the new economic model that no longer uses fossil fuels for energy, but on the other hand, it requires different metals and different raw materials for input. We have come across supply difficulties. We have seen during the COVID pandemic that at one point we didn't have rubber gloves because demand was bigger than supply. And the international trade was hampered during the pandemic. Some prices went up to 400%. We saw situations that we were not even imagining before, but this has been a wake-up call for many people. The economic model that was based on just-in-time principle, there was no stock, nobody kept stock. This era is about to come to an end, and we need to look at the stocks we need, be it chips or other components that are critically important to keep on producing. In the European Commission, where I work in DG Grow, we conducted an analysis. We took the imported goods. There are about 5,000 items, and we analyzed them from the perspective of how many of them, for how many of them we are dependent on maybe even one provider, one importer, one company. And in this analysis, we concluded that about 6% of our imported components or raw materials are such that are imported from one single importer. We aggregated. So someone said that we had maybe not so important goods like Christmas decorations in the list. You might be dependent on one Chinese producer, but it's not a problem. But if we look at critically important technologies that form the basis of the green transition, then on this slide we looked at particularly these kinds of components and raw materials, and among those we found that 6% of them are imported by one single importer, most of them from China. So the dependence from China is quite significant, and what we might learn from this is that it would make more sense to have at least two importers. In some areas, we might face the fact that we might need to start producing some components ourselves, for example, chips or semiconductors that are facing a big shortage at present. On the next slide, I would like to show how the segment of permanent magnets which are used in various technologies, and these are also an area where we are very dependent. We need to think about how dependent we want to allow ourselves to be, and we might need to look into ways of manufacturing this in Europe. The next map will demonstrate how in Europe, or where in Europe, there are deposits of rare earth elements. This is not a map of mines, it's a map of deposits, but we might be more bold in making plans for mining and taking into use the raw materials that we need. And we might also think about reusing of scrap metals and not exporting it into third countries because it might become a valuable raw material. But if we look at the need for resources throughout the world, it is moving up so fast that we have to ask whether this is sustainable. And we have to be realistic that when all of the entire world would want to consume at levels that are demonstrated by the developed Western world countries today, then one planet is not enough. We have different calculations. The latest one from last summer, an analysis of Dasgupta, where it says that we would need at least 1.6 planets if everybody wanted to keep up the level of consumption that the Western countries are demonstrating. We need to find ways to build an economy that would require less resources, that would be sustainable, that would use circular economy to make use of existing resources. So we have set goals that would take us to reusing the resources that are needed. We need to develop technologies. We need investments into the right places to achieve this. And this slide shows that the developments can be into two different scenarios. We see in the left side where we were. We were producers of semiconductors some time ago, but we lost our position, and now the automotive industry is facing the consequences. Similarly, for photovoltaic elements, Europe was a manufacturer, but production has moved elsewhere. And now, when you look at the advanced manufacturing, we are doing quite well there. And about batteries, I think we are catching up with the leading countries and now already have a strong position. I have I'm calling on TalTech to contribute to developing these technologies. Now we also have to mention the different funds that help finance all this research, but also bringing to the market. The next slide is about the innovation cycle and how different European funds are made available to achieve the digital and green transition and the research and information that these require. You might know programs like Digital Europe. This is quite new. You should Google it, and maybe you might not know the Climate Innovation Fund, which is less well known, which is dedicated to climate objectives and amounts to several billion euros. From my area of responsibility, there are the industrial alliances. These are not maybe funds for financing, but it's a very useful instrument to bring together the new sectors like the hydrogen technology sector, which without a leader might not take off very soon. Similarly, batteries, and we are launching the industrial alliances for cloud computing technologies and some other categories. Another example, whereas I spoke about problems with battery manufacturing, that the need for a lot more lithium. A manufacturer from Asia, one of the biggest manufacturers of batteries, Kettle, this summer announced that they have developed a battery technology, and this is based on very widely used minerals, and this is ready for production. So these developments give us hope that we will be able to meet the need for different resources that are required for these new transitions. now a slide that is food for thought if you are trying to make sense of this, and maybe some company directors are listening in. So what will be required? This example is from the steel industry. What drives demand, what input is needed, how to build a market so that the green economy can materialize. And I would like to say about the demand that countries can contribute. What can they do? They can call public procurements so that climate objectives and sustainability criteria would be taken into account. Estonia tends to look at prices first and foremost. If we look at rankings, then in Europe, Estonia is this country among the European countries that tends to look at price only and less on social or climate dimension. The European Commission tries to contribute to taking into account the climate objectives in procurements by developing a framework for bodies organizing these procurements. Likewise, we are amending the competition law or legal framework that would be better aligned to the new economic models. We are working on new standardization models. Standards are what make the market work, so this is important work that's ongoing. A success story that I would like to share with you on the battery field, where we were lagging behind. A few years ago, we had less than 1% of batteries produced in the world produced in Europe. Then we have a battery alliance now. There are more than 70 investment projects in the world under this, looking at raw materials, manufacturing practices, recycling processes. So a full new value chain is created, and largely thanks to this alliance brought together by this, by bringing together companies as well as countries and different programs and projects contributing to enhancement of skills and attracting more investments. I would like to conclude by saying that we need a lot of money to achieve what we want to achieve in all sectors. If we look at the volumes of investments, we can say roughly that we need to double investments in every sector, and to do it quite soon. For Estonia, I remember an estimate from the Stockholm Institute of Environment that the amount is 17 billion euros that we need for climate investments. It seems like a lot of money, but if we look at it, then we see that the investments by the EU to Estonia in the upcoming time periods are quite significant. During the next programming period, 21 to 27, about 8 billion of investments is going to be directed to Estonia. And of course, in our government budget, investments are foreseen, and as well as made by the private sector. So if we put this on a timeline, I think that if we direct them in the right directions, then we probably will deliver on the investment needs. And I also wanted to point your attention to the fact that private investments have a new framework. It's called the taxonomy. The idea is that we have agreed on a set of rules on which investments are sufficiently climate friendly, which are less climate friendly, or which are not very climate friendly. And such taxonomy can be used by bodies financing different initiatives. And I think the taxonomy gives a very powerful tool, because the investments not in line with the environmental or climate objectives will receive less funding or will not receive funding, and these investments will be much more expensive. The last slide is about the different tools also available in Estonia to finance these different objectives. And I would like to conclude by saying that I heard from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and from Enterprise Estonia representatives who said that the objective for Estonia should be the a green country on digital foundations. So I hope I have given you some ideas so that we would have a sustainable, rich and green country to continue with.
Thank you, Ms. Rute. And I would like to tell everyone who is listening to us that you can post your questions to those speaking, and you can put them in the comment session of the YouTube channel. And we are looking forward to these questions. But I will now give the floor to a professor, academic Jarek Kurnitski, who works here at Tallinn Technical University, but is a professor not only here, but also at Aalto University. And he is also the developer of one of the nearly zero energy concepts, together with his colleagues in Estonia and in Finland. He works every day with the energy efficiency issues of buildings. He also works with the ventilation studies. And therefore, I will now give the floor to Jarek. Thank you, Helen, for introducing me. And good afternoon to everybody. I would like to speak more about Estonia in my presentation. I think that everyone has already noticed that something has changed recently, that we are undergoing changes. They used to say a while back that the price of the CO2 quota is very high and it's very difficult to work with such prices. But now people are saying more and more that they have ambitious plans. They say that the price of the CO2 quota is high, but it gives us new opportunities. We will have new business models, new business lines. So the rhetorics have changed. And the fact that the rhetorics have changed, that the mindset has changed is essential. And I'd like to speak about the transition itself. What should we do? The end consumption of energy in Estonia is approximately 32 to 33 terawatts per year, which is rather stable. Approximately 7.5 terawatts is electricity, and the largest user groups are the residential buildings and non-residential buildings. And when we look at these sectors and try to analyze them, we can see that there are three pillars of energy and consumption. Buildings, transport, and transport are two of them. And the Estonian example is specific to Estonia, but actually the end consumption is very high everywhere. And therefore it has been said that buildings in Europe are consuming a lot of energy. This is the largest energy consumer. They consume more energy than we can produce by wind and sun. And if we could cut the energy consumption of buildings, that would be really useful. Of course, the most important issue is the ratio of CO2 emissions and the greenhouse gas emissions, because only then will we know what is the target of reducing these emissions. Estonia does not have a formal climate neutrality objective today. We just have fundamental rules for climate policy, which says that we have to cut our CO2 emissions by 80% by the year 2050, and we have not translated all the green transition objectives into Estonian policy, but we will be doing that. And if we look at these numbers, then right now we have approximately 12 megatons of CO2 emissions per year, which means that our emissions is even increasing right now. They should be decreasing in the near future, but unfortunately our additional measures which we are now deploying will not help us sufficiently. We will not be able to achieve our objectives that have been set, and therefore we need more knowledge and we need more technology to understand how Estonia will achieve climate neutrality. We have not figured it out yet. And the largest column is the blue one, the energy sector. 90% or approximately 90% of our emissions come from the energy sector, which is electricity, heating and fuels. And these are divided between nearly all sectors, and we don't really know how these sectors in turn consume energy. It's one of the subjects or issues which should be addressed in further details. If we take our knowledge that we have today, and we don't really have that much, we could draw up a bullet point list of 10 items, and we could start from the efficiency first principle, because Europe has recognized this principle, and they say that the best kilowatt hour is the one that is not consumed. So we must start from wasting less energy, and then it will also be important to think about renewable energy and how to cut the price of consuming renewable energy, but efficiency must come first. We have some sectors where energy consumption has been quantified. When we think about residential buildings and non-residential buildings and how to improve these buildings, meaning improving living and working conditions, we can cut 60% of energy consumption, which is 7 terawatt hours and 4 million tons of CO2. We do know what should be done in the building sector, but of course there are other sectors where we don't really know. And I would like to stress that we should do things that improve our living conditions. For example, we should have a better communal transport, because then we would use less car transport. We should have more electrical cars. We should have more onshore and offshore wind parks, more solar energy. And all of this is being done, but it should be done faster. And I think it shall be done faster in the future. Storing electricity is very important, and it will happen. We are thinking of hydro pump stations. Of course, it can also be done by using batteries on a lesser scale. In Estonia, it's important to increase production of biogas, because it's one important solution for transport, and it might be cheaper than using electricity everywhere. In the distant heating sector, we must also think of new solutions, and a lot has been done. And the ratio of renewable energy is even over 60% by now. But of course, a lot remains to be done, because we must give up fossil fuels. And we must think about distant cooling options. And then the industry sector, waste management, circular economy. And I would like to say that hydrogen and CCS are also essential when we think about new solutions in industry and transport sector. And about the green transition in maybe a bit more detail. I think that the green transition can be executed by the technologies that we already have now. And most of these technologies are already being used. And when we think about the actions, what should be done first, what should be done last, then we must think of the marginal cost method. How much of the CO2 emissions can be cut, and what will it cost the lower hanging fruit is always more attractive, and we still have a lot of low hanging fruit that should be cut first. But there are also some sectors which are lagging a bit behind. I'd like to show this slide again. And it shows wind energy and solar energy. When the ratio is increasing, and has been increasing for a while, then the hydrogen energy ratio has not been increasing, and it will not be increasing by the year 2030. And this is because we don't have enough wind and solar energy. But in order to achieve our objectives by 2050, the ratio of wind and solar energy must be increasing. Of course, these are European statistics. The Estonian ones are a bit different. We can also see that CCS, which is carbon capture and utilization, and also bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, were zero in 2017 on the European level. So CCS, CCU and BECCS are lagging behind because these technologies have not really been deployed by now. But the green transition is important, and green transition or the climate neutrality cannot be achieved without these technologies. In the cement sector, in the steel sector, these technologies really must be used, and Estonia has also carried out some research, some studies, and potentially we can also use these technologies. And to conclude my presentation, I'm sorry about the slides, they cannot be shown at the right time, but I would like to give you an example of a green transition which has actually happened, at least partly. So, when we think about the renovation of buildings in Estonia, then 3,000 apartment buildings have been renovated in Estonia, and we have a waiting list of 14,000. But there is a very clear system in Estonia because there is an institution, Kredex, which gives subsidies to the renovators, and Kredex is actually an example for the rest of Europe of how to work with residential buildings using funds that do not come from the state budget, because 32% of all renovation procurements are paid back into the state budget, because VAT is paid to the state, and also labor taxes are paid to the state. Kredex gives you 30% to renovate the building, and next year the state will also receive 30%, which is why it is actually a budget neutral measure. It is good for everyone, for the citizen, for the state, and also for the environment. So it really is a win-win-win solution. And to conclude, I would like to say that we are holders of a world record. Estonia, there are no other states than Estonia. There are no other states as Estonia where there are so many low energy or nearly zero energy buildings which house state ministers. So Estonia really is a pioneer in this field, and I think that green transition needs solutions which would be good for people, companies and the environment. And we do have some good examples in the district heating sector where green transition has already happened and where there actually are win-win-win solutions. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jarek, for this presentation, and we will now go on to the next presentation, and I would like to give the floor to a scientist, Rutt Hints, who is a geologist, and she works for Tallinn Technical Universities in the Institute of Geology, and she is the head of a research group for mineral resources and applied geology. And we will speak about critical metals and green transition now. Yes, thank you and welcome to everybody. I think it's wonderful that economists are also speaking about geology and critical raw materials, but I would also like to speak about economy. So the field of economy and the field of geology are coming together. I would like to address the issue of critical raw materials, and Maive actually already talked about them. But if we think of pan-European or global problems, there are often people who ask, but why is this a problem in a small country like Estonia? What should we do? Can we do anything? And thinking of the global picture, then many of my colleagues are speculating that we are now entering a new super cycle of demand for raw materials. All previous super cycles have coincided with industrialization waves in certain countries, but the wave we are experiencing now is unprecedented. It is indeed projected that the new cycle will be exceptional because the global demand is increasing simultaneously in various economies and in large economies. Why is this happening? It's very simple actually. We had a climate conference which was also addressed by Maive, where different countries committed to reaching objectives, but they must now translate these commitments into decarbonizing transport sectors, into building new infrastructure and so forth. The infrastructure for renewable energy is very intensive in metals. And when we compare power stations which run on coal and the onshore or offshore wind parks, then the use of metals is maybe 5 times higher in the wind parks. And we can therefore see that the transition to renewable energy is becoming the biggest reason for the unprecedented demand for critical metals and rare earth elements which are located in a small number of countries. It is also thought that only China has enough resources to implement the green transition. So we could ask, will China have the green transition and we will not? Europe needs to find its long forgotten skill to manufacture its own materials and to recycle the raw materials which are already there on the market. Europe used to be a large mining area, but it is no longer an important mining area. But where the challenges are big, the opportunities are also big, and even small countries have those opportunities. We can see in the sector of raw materials that Europe now has new types of economy and new types of businesses, and we are actually on the same page, so to speak. Maive spoke about Battery Alliance, which is a very good example because businessmen and the entrepreneurships are trying to work together with the demand. Now speaking about Estonia and Estonia's geological potential, then we have some resources. For example, carbophosphorate and also phosphorus. And they are rare earth elements which have a larger supply risk because of the present times. And it's found in the so-called black shards. When speaking about phosphorate, then these resources are of low quality and they do not contain so many rare earth elements compared to some others. But still, they are good resources because when we think about permanent magnets and what needs to be put into them, then our phosphorate contains some things, some elements which are important for producing permanent magnets. And we could even say that our phosphorate is even better for making permanent magnets than some other compounds from which rare earth elements can be mined. But it's not so simple. If it were simple, then many countries would already be doing that. The problem with rare earth elements is not the location of finding them, but the complexity of the supply chain. And all continents have some locations where you could find rare earth elements, even though they are mainly mined in China. But the key issue is the capability to separate the individual rare earth elements. And more than 90% of this market is in China today. But Estonia has some advantages. Estonia has a separation factory, Silmet, which is in Sillamäe in northeastern Estonia, and we can separate rare earth elements there. It's one of the very few locations outside China which is capable of separating rare earth elements. This is what we have now. Can we build something on this? We know about rare earth elements that we should already start recycling the permanent magnets which are there in some technologies. We should recycle and recover the first generation raw materials, for example, from the first generation electrical generators. There is a demand on the European market, and there is an idea to recycle permanent magnets from what we already have. And therefore, we could think bigger. We could ask ourselves, does Estonia have a capability to develop bigger clusters, given that we have specific ideas relating to rare earth elements? We can separate them, we can make permanent magnets, but maybe we can also recover and reuse permanent magnets and construct wind turbines or engines using those magnets. We could connect this to the hydrogen cluster because there are many features which are the same for both clusters. Building up such new industry is really challenging for a small country like Estonia. The first challenge being that the new ideas call for a lot of investment. And speaking about the investments, it's important for us to be in the right place at the right time. And today we are in the right place at the right time. Europe has successfully launched the Battery Alliance, and they are now looking in the direction of rare earth elements. And the European Raw Material Alliance recently issued a document, a call for action document on rare earth elements. And this call for action points to Estonia as a potential investment area, because we can separate rare earth elements and produce and reuse permanent magnets here in Estonia. And it is now discussed on the European level whether the production of rare earth elements could be made more competitive in a situation where China is subsidizing manufacturing of rare earth elements in its own country. So there are some plans which are already on the table. We can also think about subsidizing the sector in order to use or reuse rare earth elements found and mined in Europe. Of course, if we talk about potential ways of using our natural resources, we must have a social agreement or a social license, so to speak. And this calls for the input of social scientists. Their input will really be huge because the entire society must agree to do this, otherwise we can't do it. And then there are legal issues. We need to harmonize our legal space with the European science, and your university, TalTech, will be able to educate people working in this sector. And finally, given that this is a technical university, our role is first and foremost to provide innovative ideas, to provide innovation to the new industries, whether they work with rare earth elements or other critical raw materials. Whether it's a circular economy, because that's also very important, or maybe it's extracting magnesium from oil shale rock, waste rock, or something else. And finally, I would like to promote Tallinn Technical University and say that we have been a member of 8 raw materials for more than 5 years, and one of the opportunities or one of the solutions for our study groups would be to participate or indeed initiate international projects or pan-European projects and give their input in solving the problems, the crises, by providing some innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rutt. Before the last speaker, I invite our listeners and spectators to be active, to write comments and questions in the comment section of our YouTube channel, so that we can, in the panel that will follow the presentations, find answers to your questions. But our last speaker is Marek Tiits. He's an entrepreneur, but at the same time also a researcher at TalTech. And we will talk about green transition as the opportunity and challenge of the century. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. I would like to start by recalling day before yesterday, which was a very important day. Intel's first microprocessor turned 50 day before yesterday, and this is what was the cornerstone of the IT era that we are living today. Why am I talking about this microprocessor? There are 2 reasons for doing this. It's an interesting story. Intel at the time was not aware of what they were doing. The 4 people that were producing this commissioned by Japan and failed to meet the deadlines that were set did not expect it to be a game changer in the world. But the biggest part of this microprocessor developed along with the personal computers and the understanding how technology can change the way the world functions. And I would like to show an image from Carlota Perens, a professor at TalTech. Her book about technological revolutions is one of the most popular books on international business management in Amazon. But she said that if we look at the history of economics for the last century, then we can see 5 different waves of development powered by new technologies, new ideas and mindset. And I started that the last 50 years have been an IT era. This was preceded by the mass manufacturing, oil and car era, along with the quotation that you can get whatever version of 4T as long as it's black. At the same time, it's clearly different from the IT era, where we expect everything to be personalized, individualized. But what I'm trying to say is that probably looking at the history of economics, if we look at clean technologies, biotechnologies, technologies that form the basis for the green transition, will be what the next big development wave will be based on. And this has a significant impact on the development of the world economy and the development of quality of life in different parts in the world. The red line describes the core countries in the forefront of the technological revolutions, the early adopters, the developers, and the blue line is for the rest of the world. And you can see the contrast between the Western Europe and the United States, marked with the red line, and the rest of the world with the blue line, including China, which has gone through a very rapid economic development since 1980s. And you can see that IT era has brought a lot of diversity in terms of different countries. You can see that the countries that are the forerunners of these revolutions benefit the most. But if we look at EU and our plans for the green transition, the quicker and the more efficient we are in moving it forward, the better the Estonian and EU economies will do in the sustainable, environmentally friendly and technology-intensive economy. The more beneficial it is for us in terms of economic growth and in terms of saving the planet or saving the climate. This is why the title of my presentation was The Green Transition as the Opportunities and Challenges of this Century. The developments of the 21st century will be shaped by climate goals in a very powerful way. The question is how fast this development will be and what the economic implications of the green transitions will be. We have talked about energy, about energy efficiency. What hasn't been mentioned, but in the context of international politics it's very important, is that the adoption of renewable energy sources will change the geopolitical context in the world. The energy is not limited to a small amount of countries that possess the resources. Every country can now generate their own energy using their renewable technologies. what I wanted to say on the climate transition and the related action plans and strategies is that if we try to follow the next development wave, we shouldn't think about the investments that were already previously mentioned, how much the green transition and attainment of climate objectives will cost. We should think about it being expenditure that is needed, and we should look at the investments as if they are investments into new products, new technologies, new markets, which will shape the world. But on the other hand, the question to Estonia is how Estonia will find its place in the new world. What shall we produce, manufacture? What will be the products that Estonia will be known for? And these are very important questions that require extensive discussions in Estonia. I mentioned the environmental and energy technologies, but also mentioned biotechnologies. This is a sphere where we should look for new opportunities, for example, in synthetic biology, in the context of food production or materials production. If we look at biotechnologies and the technologies under development that will be ready for broad use in 10 or 20 years, then we can be optimistic about materials that we use today. About 60% of them can be manufactured from renewable sources, from timber, etc. And this is an important topic in terms of developing the circular economy, but also improving climate and environmental conditions. But also it allows us to find new markets and new ways to do business. So my suggestion is not to think about investments as costs or expenditure, but as new opportunities for product development. And let us look at these brave developers of microchips who 50 years ago didn't know what they were doing, but achieved something really big. Thank you very much. We will continue with the panel discussion, but in order to prepare for the discussion, we will have a break, and we can watch a film produced for the Dubai Expo about a town of the future. It can be smart, although energy intensive. Mathematicians and physicists have contributed to a carbon neutral future by way of coming up with new voltaic panels. So your questions are still welcome in the chat of the YouTube channel.
Tallinna Tehnikaülikooli materjaliteadlased ja füüsikud panustavad süsinikuneutraalsesse tulevikulinna innovaatiliste päikesepaneelidega. Need poolläbipaistvad, kerged ning painduvad päikesepaneelid on valmistatud jätkusuutlikest materjalidest unikaalse tehnoloogia abil, mis võimaldab neid lausa välja printida. Nii on tulevikulinna pargipingid, fassaadid, bussipeatused, kõnniteed ning kõik muud võimalikud ja mittevõimalikud pinnad kaetud imeõhukeste päikesepaneelidega. Tulevikulinn toodab elektrit keskkonnasõbralikult ja suuremate kuludeta just seal, kus seda kõige enam vajatakse. tulevikulinn algab TalTechist.
We can now move on. Let's start with the discussion. My first question is to Maive Rute. We talked at length about the green transition in the context of industry. What are the first suggestions to the government of Estonia? What should be done in Estonia immediately so that we can implement the green transition in industry as quickly as possible? This is a very good question, of course. I do not want to advise the government, but I would like to mention a few things that are clearly important. The first thing, the legislation about the climate package. It is not yet set in stone in Estonia. It's being negotiated in Brussels, in the Council, in the Parliament. The first thing is to be active in representing our views in Brussels and then in the best way translate them into Estonian legislation. In parallel, of course, because there's no time to lose, the schemes that already exist through the Environmental Investment Center, CREDEX, we mentioned the installation schemes for buildings. I think these should continue. But when we speak about industry, I think there are a few opportunities that haven't received due attention. We might look at the opportunities for growth, for example, storage technologies, the already well-known ways for finding new growth opportunities. We should combine, invite different stakeholders and create a pipeline of different projects. Probably assistance can be found from TalTech as well as Enterprise Estonia. So we could have maybe a dozen projects that are significant enough, and then we should seek partners from Europe. In Europe, through the Industrial Alliance and other schemes, we are launching big programs that are intended for supporting the implementation of such new measures. We talked about raw materials. There's the Raw Material Alliance dealing with these aspects. These should be analyzed, and we might help. It might help seek the projects with the social acceptance. We need to target our objectives and limit our focus areas and intensely work on this. Yes, that's of course true, but I do not want to underestimate the involvement of general public through events like today's. If in 50 years ago a small bunch of people developed the microchip, then today someone might develop a new approach that would end up being a breakthrough from biotechnology or something from storage technology. We shouldn't underestimate the capabilities and the public debates about implementation. Thank you. Next question is to Jarek. Your research topic is not only about reducing carbon emissions, but improving living environments through improving the building stock. The last Human Development report said that half of Estonians said that their living conditions need improving. At the same time, 70% of people in Estonia live in apartments, whereas in the EU, 41% of people on average live in apartments. 13% of households have all the conveniences, and this is one of the lowest figures in the EU. At the same time, the pace of renovations, do you see it as being slow? Is it reasonable? Is it quick? Or a question from the comments, will it take more than 100 years, or can we speed it up given today's economic situation? Yes, the topic that you raised, the poor living conditions, these are the result of our history. The wasteful energy use of our Soviet heritage gives us opportunities that our neighbors, Finland, Sweden, do not have, to improve the living conditions in a way that will benefit people in a tangible manner, but is economically reasonable and viable. This is a unique opportunity that we have in Estonia. This is something that has been realized, and there's a study about the 32% ending up in the state budget. This is one of the studies that has been read most among policymakers, and this has shaped the idea that there's a strong system of support handed out via credits. We might complain about the pace, that it's a bit slow, and maybe it's not always even. It has ups and downs, and now there are measures to support the economy because of the pandemic, but the renovation support has supported us through economic crisis. But this is not a short-term project. It could be a 30-year project, if not 30 years, then 35 years. This is something that we have maybe reached perfection in. It might be the best in the EU. It's very thorough. It has a very long perspective, and this is unique. We have experience since 2010. We have made many mistakes, and we see different EU countries making the same mistakes now. We are ahead of the rest of the EU countries, and I think our politicians have realized that this is a measure that has now benefited maybe 200,000 people in Estonia, but will benefit 500,000 more, because due to our historic background, more people live in apartment buildings, and this makes attainment of these objectives easier than if there were more individual buildings. You are optimistic. Yes, I am. There's a lot of work to be done. Green transition is ongoing. We have 3,000 buildings renovated, 14,000 in the pipeline. We will get there. Do you know how many buildings have been renovated this year or will be renovated this year? Our best years have seen about 270 buildings per year, and this might grow to 400, maybe even 500 buildings per year. But we have tested our limits. We are able to achieve this, and the market can absorb this volume. But in the context of a lot of money being invested into new buildings, a lot of new apartments being built, it shouldn't have too big of an impact on the renovations market. But we need to use this momentum and direct the support to regional measures as well. In the last round, a lot of investments were directed outside the capital region and the second biggest town, Tartu. So if not use this kind of approach, what should we use at all? Now, about critical raw materials, and a question to you, Rutt. We read from a daily newspaper that hypothetically, for the world to become climate neutral by 2050, the demand for critical mineral raw materials will increase 6 times. And the report states that if we do not start to mine intensively right now, the attainment of climate objectives will be delayed. And the report also said that the impact of mining is many times smaller than the mining of fossil fuels. My first question is, do we have the technologies that in a resource efficient way and in a more environmentally friendly way would allow us to mine these raw materials? The best critical raw material is something that can be substituted. The innovation into developing new technologies is very important. The problem is that the new technologies are such that will reach the market in 20 or 30 years' time. Today, we need to rely on the technologies that use the energy resources that are widely used today. If we would want to analyze what would make mining more environmentally friendly and cut the footprint, there is no single answer or technology. We need to talk about optimizing the supply chain and production chain. One of the components of this is digitalization, so that we can reduce waste and make it more efficient. But also the use of mining byproducts in circular economy is something that is receiving a lot of attention. If we today we are using raw materials of lower quality, then we see today that recycled raw materials are already of a better quality than newly mined raw materials. If the attention would be directed to this would be what would help. But if we talk about the future, if there will be something left to mine, then the geological studies need to be launched in Europe, and this hasn't been done for a long time, so that we would have something to mine in 2045. I would like to add that our best practices of mining in the EU are globally set as taken as something to follow. And one hope about green transition is that the environmentally friendly mining practices would help to contribute to our exports capabilities.
But speaking about the waste rock of oil shale in northeastern Estonia, you said that it might contain magnesium. And this is very interesting for me because magnesium is one of one worrying issue, because again China has it and we don't. More than half of Chinese factories that were exporting magnesium have now shut down. They are opening again, but they are not exporting magnesium, which causes problems for aluminium and steel manufacturers in Europe and for many others. And that's why it would be interesting to think about our oil shale waste rock. Would we really have enough magnesium? Should we mine it? Should we separate it? Could it be used? Yes. But oil shale waste rock is something which you first need to process in order to make it into something more valuable. But this calls for innovation, because waste rock is actually low quality, and to separate poor magnesium from that is not, it's not simple. It does not compare to the Chinese one. Yes, and I would like to ask our last presenter. Andrew Paul McAfee from MIT has written a bestseller, More from Less. And in his bestseller, he provides some examples. He states that the new economical model, which is based on sustainability, focuses on more awareness. Citizens and people should understand better what we are consuming, and we should all change our way of life. What do you think about this? Can we influence people? Can we make people in Estonia behave differently to reduce our carbon footprint? Would Estonians be willing to pay more for products and services which have less impact on the environment? Do you think it's something that we can do? Is it possible to become more knowledgeable and smarter consumers? This was actually a lot of questions, not just one, but I will still try to reply. Firstly, I think that the question of investing and then consuming is a question of good examples. If you look at your neighbor and your neighbor is doing something and you can see that it's a good way of doing this, and also it's a sustainable and economically feasible way of doing things, then you might follow suit. If we look at the environmental footprint and the CO2 emissions in Estonia, then Jarek said that our energy sector is the biggest emitter. But the more we develop the dispersed production of solar and wind energy, the less we will need to produce energy, electrical energy from oil shale and wood. Actually, the energy prices have increased very sharply. We didn't project this, but it happened, and it's positive in the way that we would be now more motivated to use solar panels or wind turbines at our homes. Of course, the setback is the lack of storage devices, but we will have them as well. I think the storage issue must first be solved at the grid level, not at the battery level at homes. But yes, I think that people are rational beings, at least in most part. And if someone gives them a good example and provides them good ideas, then yes, I think that people will try to be more better for the environment and economy. Yes, I would like to add that many goods and products which are manufactured by fossil fuels are abnormally cheap. And if our economical model is changing and we tax carbon footprint and environmental footprint more fairly, then we will see at some point that a green product which is more environmentally friendly will also be cheaper, it will be affordable, and we no longer have to think whether we can afford green products because the entire society will have changed. And we will also gain some help from the new legislation which Europe has, and Estonia will also have. I talked about Fit for 55 package. We have launched some of the measures. Some will be launched in December and some in March next year. For example, we have Sustainable Product Initiative, which is also a new measure, and its objective is not to think about the climate footprint only on the factory level, not only calculate the energy used to produce the product, but we must look at the entire life cycle of the product and the life cycle footprint. And this footprint should be reflected in the product price. And the other principle that should be deployed much more and is going to be deployed much more, it concerns products that have reached the market but are not sold. They should not be just tossed to the waste bin. They should be either recovered or reused or recycled. And the third principle is that we should design the products in a way that makes them, that extends their life cycle. We used to have German cars and Italian shoes which could last a lifetime, but now you only have such clothes which are only for one season. So this mindset should change, and also products should be designed in a way that enables their reuse or cascade use or recycling. We should reshape the entire logic of our economy so that the footprint or the impact on the environment would be less severe. And at some point it should become natural for all of us to buy green products and green services because they would be affordable and fairer than those goods which are produced by fossil fuels and are artificially cheap. Yes, I'd also like to add something to the issue of conscientious behavior. We can see that younger people think much more about the environment, and when they make some choices, when they buy something, they consider the environment much more. So in a certain way we can see that when our life standard is improving and the green transition will also improve our standard of living, then we will also be more or better able to be conscious consumers, to think about the right way of action, the right choices. So green transition is an ongoing process, and it's actually very important to understand the real meaning of the green transition. It is something that improves people's lives, at least when these people are reasonable. Thank you. Follow-up question. In addition to green transition, which is a positive program and aims to achieve climate neutrality, there are other important factors that the society should take into account. One of such factors is the crisis of biological diversity. The Estonian Human Development Report, the very last one, said that Estonia has now ranks higher, but we have paid an disproportionately high ecological price for this increase or better ranking, and would like to know how to be efficient, how to be resource efficient and economically efficient, but also environmentally friendly at the same time. Can this be done? Is the green transition answer to this question? Will green transition cure us also from the crisis of biological diversity? Yes, I will kick off, but I think everyone will want to add something. Green transition is a step in that direction, and it's also a guideline. As I said, green transition is not just about energy, it's also about mindset. It's about understanding that our planet has certain limits, and our economic growth can not mean that we just use more and more resources. What should be done? Firstly, the very simple things which we already talked about: better insulation for the buildings, more reasonable consumption, less waste, not so much wasting, but maybe also some new and more innovative ideas which younger people have. For example, that you don't have to own everything. You can maybe use services. You can rent a car, you don't have to buy it. The shared economy, service economy, we can see it around us. And we have some advantages in Europe of which we don't think about every day. For example, Jarek said that we have cities which are rather compact, which means that we can use public transport, but also we can use even bicycles to go around in the city. These are the things of which we should think when trying to shape a more environmentally friendly society. I think there are a few things which would be very positive in the so-called new society. I like to think that we will have more personal freedom or autonomy when energy production will be more decentralized, because then everyone could have some solar panels or some battery system at their own home to produce their own energy, and maybe have a small business because of this energy production. This is a very positive thing. But then there are some trends concerning circular economy, reuse, recycling, and optimizing one's own behavior, not to spend too much, to consume more reasonably. These are important keywords indicating that in the future we will have more services, more peer-to-peer services, which don't call for using additional resources, and where we will have intense manufacturing, but the manufacturing will also be better focused, which allows for more biological diversity, to retain more forests and wild grasslands and so on. So in order to meet our needs, we must think about how to do it on a smaller territory with new technologies such as biotechnology and other technologies, so that we could use resources more efficiently but consume less. Jarek. Yes, because we are capable of resource efficiency. For example, in the buildings we are using less and less fossil fuels, which is very important for resource efficiency. And thinking about the Estonian perspective, there are some things which we will not run out of, such as sand or forest or land. Estonia has enough of all of this, but chopped timber and bioenergy are also very important when thinking about green transition. Our forests must be sustainably managed, and this has been a problem for the Estonian society. We have been debating the forest issue for a long time. We must have biological diversity, but also have reasonable forest management, because we need to use our own raw material, our own timber, make it more valuable, and use the residue in our own production system. So we need to think about forest management